This decade, we have the opportunity to harness the power of nature and reduce the rate of global warming. Energy and agriculture are responsible for about 90% of human greenhouse gas emissions, so changing our energy sources and how we produce our food can have a significant impact on emissions of carbon dioxide and, importantly, methane. Energy is the sector most responsible for greenhouse gases, with agriculture in second place. But the agricultural sector is the biggest emitter of methane. One of the main sources of methane emission is rice production, which alone is responsible for 8 to 12% of global human-caused methane emissions.
One of the things that is very closely linked to climate change is the methane emission that comes from rice paddies. Standing water, that is one of the reasons why methane gets generated from the paddy fields.
Rice is conventionally grown in flooded paddy fields. The water reduces weeds but also stops oxygen from penetrating the soil, creating ideal conditions for methane-generating bacteria. And methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. In the first 20 years after release, methane is 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in Earth's atmosphere. This is why cutting methane emissions is the best way to slow climate change over the next 25 years. But rice is the staple food for more than half the world's population, and more than 1 billion people depend on rice cultivation for their livelihood. We need a solution, and we already have one that has been proven time and again and is fully scalable. The System of Rice Intensification, or SRI, is a climate-smart way of growing rice that increases yields at reduced costs, and through the reduction of water, fertiliser and agrochemicals can reduce methane emissions by up to 70%.
One of the critical practices in SRI is that we do not need to maintain standing water all the time. But where there is possibility of managing water, then we try to drain out the fields. We don't allow it to fully dry, of course, before replenishing it with water again. So once you avoid these totally anaerobic conditions, that has an effect on the methane emission as well. This definitely helps climate change, I would say.
Project Drawdown, the world's leading resource for climate solutions, acknowledges SRI as an existing means by which to reduce global methane emissions quickly, effectively, economically and significantly. And SRI-2030 aims to drastically scale up the area of land under SRI cultivation from 6.7 million to 50 million hectares by 2030. That's nearly a third of the world's 167 million hectares of rice fields. The logic for scaling SRI is the same we have seen with renewable energy. Energy is the only sector where humanity has made significant progress in combating climate change. There are 4 reasons for this. Renewable energy solutions like solar and wind are modular, scalable, proven, and economically attractive. These 4 reasons for success in the energy sector also apply to SRI. It is modular. It can be applied in plots of land, field by field. It is scalable. It can be scaled across the millions of hectares under rice cultivation today. It is proven. It has been practiced successfully for 40 years. And it is economically attractive. Farmers enjoy higher yields and lower input costs. SRI yields are increased by managing the water in the fields and giving each plant more light and space to grow in, with seedlings planted singly and wide apart in a grid pattern. SRI requires 80% less seed, less energy, less water, and particularly for women, it improves health and well-being. And SRI brings other significant benefits.
Ni ukuvuga ko dufatiye kuri hectare imwe twara turonka itone kuva kuri 0 gushika kuri 5 mugo tugeze ku itone 9 ibiharo bitwereka ko tushaka ku itone 9
ចឹងខ្ញុំបានអនុវត្តទៅឃើញថាទិន្នផលកើនឡើងចាជាលំដាប់ចាអញ្ចឹងបានន័យថាការធ្វើបបសនេះវាមានផលប្រយោជន៍ធ្វើឲ្យគ្រួសារខ្ញុំពីមុនមានសមាជិក5កូន5ម៉ែឪពី7នាក់ខ្ញុំហូបឲ្យគ្រប់គ្រាន់នេះចាដោយសារទទួលទិន្នផលបានតិចហើយក្រោយពីខ្ញុំអនុវត្តបបសមកឃើញថាប្រាក់ចំណូលខ្ញុំអាចមានប្រាក់ចំណូលពីការលក់ស្រូវ
Since its beginning here in central Madagascar in the 1980s, SRI has largely spread as a grassroots movement by word of mouth and small-scale projects that have trained farmers and allowed them to witness for themselves the benefits it brings. After converting to SRI in 2002, rice farmer Gerald Aruna from Sierra Leone started teaching whole villages about the system.
It was at the start very challenging to work with this community on SRI, since they've been farming using the conventional practices of cultivating rice, and to change them from what they knew and bringing them to cultivating rice using the SRI was initially very difficult. But demonstrating positive results of higher productivity using the SRI method, farmers have been able to adopt this method.
Here in Cambodia, young farmers like Polly act as role models in their communities.
ចឹងខ្ញុំធ្វើស្រែបបសហ្នឹងគឺខ្ញុំធ្វើអនុវត្តបានច្រើនជាងគេអញ្ចឹងមិនគេទទួលស្គាល់ថាខ្ញុំហ្នឹងកែធ្វើហើយក៏គេឆ្ងល់ក៏គេមកសួរខ្ញុំហើយក៏ខ្ញុំជួយផ្សព្វផ្សាយជួយបញ្យល់គាត់ថាដែងនេះជួយធ្វើស្រែបបសទៅគឺវាមានផលប្រយោជន៍ច្រើនណាស់
The benefits are there for the taking by making better use of available resources, but even expert trainers do not have the power to convince by words alone.
อันนี้เนี่ย หมายความว่าการที่ว่าไปส่งเสริมหรือว่าไปแนะนำชาวสกรให้มาหันมาปลูกข้าวกาเก็บเดียวหรือว่าการนำเสนอเทคนิคใหม่ให้ชาวสกรผู้ใหม่เกี่ยวกับการปลูกข้าวกาเก็บเดียวนี้ในเบื้องต้นนั้นชาวสกรบ่มีความเชื่อมั่นในเบื้องต้นบ่มีความเชื่อมั่นเขาเจ้าว่าโอ้ดำเกียบเดียวจังได๋มันสิได้กินโอ้ยบ่ได้กินดอกแบบนี้นะชาวสกรเขาเจ้าว่านั้นและเขาเจ้าบ่เชื่อ
Peer-to-peer learning and observation are key, and so is collaboration.
We've seen very clearly from previous experiences that if you push it down on extension systems and farmers, that it will not work. But if you integrate it into education programs where farmers have a real opportunity to explore this in their own fields and work with it, it is giving good results. And that is also what we've been able to demonstrate.
We involved the community, and what we did was we adopted the participatory approach where the new method and the old method were both done on the same plot to convince them about the productivity. When the harvesting was done, we compared the production, and then only they got convinced that by this method they were able to produce more.
Several states in India have already adopted SRI and have important lessons to pass on.
The state government also incentivizes, gives a financial incentive for the people, the farmers who want to take this technology. And we've seen very good results, and hopefully we would like to include other players, including more NGOs, to bring about still further progress in advancement of SRI in the state.
समस्त के जनाबार और आमर ई काम के देखबे लोग गुरा सीखबे आमर पाखे आसी नहीं पारले फिर अलगा मन करनेले कि आमर जनता कुहासी आमे देखी कि हेडा के आमे अनुभव करलु कि तार पछे आमे देखलु से माने ता चाष करूथिले तो से चाष देखि कि आमे करू तो आमे तांकर जगह रे जाई नि पारले फिर आमे सेटा देखि कि कर्मा इटा हमर आशा है और आमे फिर इटा आशा करू छु कि लोग गुरा आमर जेन काम अच्छे आमर जेन अच्छे अलगा मन के पहुँचाबार लगी आमे हेले चाहू छूँ कि आमर ई काम सबु आड़े करते हेले आउ टिके भलेता कही के आमे चाहू छूँ। धन्यवाद।
le mangarata kan fai charoti fale isi apian ura hitata na jewana si manawis fa le bahita ko chanawis ya sais pumruna manawori ar simila ko maneta na sa ko isi drive manat na we natawa ro kurte para vananti te bap na deta na bon teja chatia teja pan me na we bapa na hai te se me se bam shara se le boy shara tai kepa am na mana mantit.
We can all help achieve this goal by investing in SRI. This is possible if everyone, from farmer to consumer, is on board. To upscale SRI to 50 million hectares, SRI-2030 is calling on policymakers to prioritise SRI and farmers in their national adaptation planning and agricultural policies, which will help countries meet their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. To adapt infrastructure to help farmers use water more efficiently. To back research on improving SRI performance and impacts. And to support SRI adaptation for large-scale mechanised operations. Donors. To support governments in their SRI efforts, to help promote awareness of SRI among farmers, to fund SRI training and extension. The private sector to think creatively and recognise the potential for investment in the transition necessary for scaling up the adoption of SRI across the world. This includes consideration for equipment supplies and marketing channels for higher quality SRI rice. Consumers, to demand rice that is sustainably and responsibly produced. SRI 2030 estimates that by upscaling SRI to 50 million hectares by 2030, it is possible to prevent the emission of 1.4 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, with a potential reduction of 8.5 billion tonnes by 2050. And the increase in rice yields combined with reduced inputs could generate an extra $275 billion in profits for farmers by 2030 and $1.6 trillion by 2050. SRI can help to feed the world's population with less water on the same amount of land and thereby mitigate climate change. Our choices this decade define all our futures.